What did I say?
Agriculture.
Agriculture. And we described the GN ratio, that this is the most powerful manifestation of what's called Tigburus Hara. Remember those words? Tigburus Hara? Tigburus Hara, right. When you say those words, those are the words of a Chachamim.
Around the room.
You say the word Nam and they'll let you in any yeshiva in the world. No. Most of them will not know what you're talking about, but if they do figure it out, Tigburus Hara, as we said, is the expansion of evil and the expansion of Choshech. We have to have quiet now. And the greatest expansion of Choshech is in the most subtle manifestation. And that subtle manifestation lies in the alteration of human consciousness. That is its essence. The greatest manifestation of Ra, or darkness in the world, lies in the alteration of human consciousness. When the mind slowly begins to think differently without being aware that it's actually shifting in thought. That is the greatest punishment that God gives man, and that is a direct consequence of his chatoim. There is no tikkun for that kind of event. Since that event is beyond awareness itself, it's not possible to undo it, and you can barely be aware of it. We will see shortly that this type of event has different effects on different people. What kind of effect it has on regular people, and the kind of effect it has on very big tzaddikim.
There has to be a tikkun.
Yes, that is the tikkun. Means that, but there are certain types of darkness which is brought on the world, and it's possible to remove that darkness voluntarily. There are other types of darkness which are brought on the world which can never be removed, because the darkness itself becomes the manifestation, and the expression of the darkness itself is the tikkun. And the GN ratio, when it's affected, meaning that when the world begins to lose its capacity to relate, when people begin to lose their capacity to relate to their neshamas and gain the capacity to relate to their bodies, they lose touch with spirituality, and that loss can never be regained unless the Mashiach appears. That is the only way. You know, it's the only way. The GN always goes down. If this is N and that's G, we all know what GN means. G stands for Guf, N stands for Neshama. And what we said, just very briefly, is that a person is a combination of a Guf and Neshama. G plus N. And the Guf and Neshama both represent two entirely different entities. A Guf is an entity which lives by itself, has its own drives and its own needs. We know what the needs of the Guf are. It desires its own pleasures, its own maintenance. It lives without a soul. It can live without a neshama. It needs a nefesh tachtona. But that is really a piece of the Guf. It's a subtle form of the Guf. There is something also called a neshama. That's G. Guf. There is something called a neshama. A neshama is a different type of entity. It has absolutely nothing to do with a Guf. It has the same similarity to a Guf, let's say, that a plant has to an animal. There are two different species, two different entities. A neshama is a spiritual entity, not a physical one. It is composed of spiritual substance, and it has its own set of needs. It also has needs. What are those needs? The needs of a neshama unbeknownst to most of you, to all of you really, is a extremely powerful desire to absorb truth or the subtleties of the light of the B'nai Shem's presence. That's its need, you see. Do you feel that need? No. You don't even know what that need is. But the neshama, as it exists by itself, has such a need. It is a very high thing, it's a very high purpose. When it exists by itself, it has that need. The guf has its needs to eat, to sleep, procreate, its own thing. Now, what the B'nai Shem did was, he took these two separate entities, which can exist by themselves, separate from each other, and he combined them. The result was man, an Adam. An Adam is a unique entity who is a combination of two different entities. Now, this is very important to understand. Most people will tell you that man is a combination of two different substances. That's how most people look at the guf and the neshama. They say the guf is physical, the neshama is spiritual, and God created man by combining two different substances. That's not what I'm saying. God did not create man by combining two different substances. What am I saying?
He combined two different beings.
Exactly. Man is a combination of two different beings, two different literal individual entities. That's a whole different ballgame, a whole different thing. There is no, why is that?
Well, how can the group live without the neshama? Without that other aspect there.
It cannot live without a nefesh. But
so then that one separate being cannot be on its own then. You said two separate beings.
No. I said the guf and the neshama can exist separately. Guf does not need the neshama to live. But for a guf to live, it needs its own nefesh. A nefesh is in its blood, and it's still a physical thing, except it's extremely subtle and cannot be sensed physically either.
Excuse me. Is this a diagram of a man or a Jewish man?
It's a diagram of every person.
Every person has a neshama.
Well, you see, technically speaking, and I think we should be restricted to this point, this is a diagram of a Jew. You see. There are other aspects, it is also the diagram of a guy. The reason why that's a very technical question is because the nature of goyim has changed over time. The cup?
Yeah.
Come in?
Check it for the bomb.
He asked me if he's Jewish, and he wants to sit down. Oh. Oh. My God, this place is really moving. When you look at human history or mankind over the totality of human history, mankind was without goyim for the first almost 2,000 years. There were no goyim in the world. There were only people, and all of them were the same. From the time of Adam Rishon until Matan Torah, until the giving of the Torah at Sinai, after the exodus to Egypt, there was no such thing as a goy, and there was no such thing as a Jew. There was no distinction of mankind into two different types of individuals.
Yeah. Don't you distinguish between idol worship?
That's something else. You distinguish between a Mechala Shabbos and not a Mechala Shabbos also. An idol worship was simply a person who worshipped idols. And if a person didn't worship idols, an idol worship is simply a person who transgressed. But as far as the spiritual purpose of all of mankind, it was identical.
How about Ham?
It doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter.
They were cursed.
Wait, I realize. You see, there's a technical problem here. There's a technical problem. And the truth is, Series 3 deals with that. No? But I'll just speak about this just briefly. Let me explain this thing. It's a long technical subject. Why? Because when you say about Goyim and Jews, you must deal with human history. At the parts of human history when there were no Goyim, when there were Goyim, and even the face of Goyim have changed. Do you think that Goyim are the same today as they were 500 years ago? No, absolutely not. Do you think Goyim are the same 500 years ago as they were 1,000 years before that? Totally different people, totally different beings. Is there something they have in common? Yes, but they were vastly different. And the face of human history itself changes as the Goyim change. For example, and we won't go into this in long detail, but for example, there was something in this country called the American Revolution, and there was something called the French Revolution. There was a whole new thing going on in the 18th century called Égalité, Liberté, and Eternité. Fraternité. Okay? There were a number of countries which were experiencing this. When you learn history, you normally think, well, America had a revolution, France had a revolution, Russia had a revolution, whatever the story is. That's the Chitzonius. But if you look at it from its internal thing, what really happened was that in 1776, a new class of Goyim were created that had never existed before. That's really what happened. What we see of the shifting movements, of historical movements, is the shifting changes of the human being itself and total classes of people. New souls enter the world that never existed. And that's why a new country develops with a whole different culture to reflect a whole different type of people. A culture of a nation is a direct reflection of the neshamas of that people. If you look out today and you see so many different cultures, it's because there are so many different types of neshamas. If a new culture suddenly emerges in the world, a new class of neshamas has been created. Why has a new class of neshamas been created? That has to do with the Hanogas HaMishpat and the Hanogas HaYichud. It has to do with the Jews, it has to do with the ultimate Tikkun, Olam Haba, and so on. Series 3 is 14 tapes long, for the reason that it's going to explain in detail exactly this entire process, from the time of Adam to the end of the Yemos Mashiach. We will trace in history itself, critically, all the major changes of all the nations throughout time and how this exactly reflected what happened among the Jews at every point in time. You see? See what I'm saying? That's why it's a very complex question. But, very briefly, to put it simply, before Matan Torah, technically speaking, there were no Jews and there were no Goyim. Spiritually, everyone was on basically the same level. What I'm saying is not absolutely true. There were variations. One of them you point out, Hom. Hom was a variation on a theme. You see. But there were no major variations on a theme. There were minor variations on a theme until Matan Torah. After Matan Torah, something was created that had never existed before. Very simply, most of us look at Matan Torah and we all think that the Jewish nation was created. We were given the Torah. The Baruch Hashem says, "I will be your God, and you will be my people, and I give you 630 commandments." So the concept of a Jew was created on Matan Torah, and all the other nations were requested to take the Torah. They all refused. What really happened is the exact opposite. What was created for the first time, which never existed before, was the concept of a Goy. That concept never existed before Matan Torah. What is a Goy? What is its purpose? How does it interact with Jews at every step of the way? How is the Goy used by Mishpat? How is he used by the Hanogas HaYichud? All of this is a very complex subject, and it's all very much intertwined with Jewish history, as you can see. The whole explanation of the diaspora, of the exile, has to do with the nature of Goyim. Why is it that at any point in time we are exiled to the Romans? Why after that we go to the, let's say, to a different nation? Why is it that these Jews are scattered among the Arabs and these Jews are scattered in the north? You see, is there anything which determines all that? Yes, there's an exact measure and there's an exact rule which determines where every Jew will go and what country he will be exiled to. And these rules have to do with the inner things. It has to do with the nature of the neshamas of these people and the general relationship of Jews and Goyim and the ultimate tikkunim which they will both represent. But it's a vast subject. It has to do with the whole concept of Yishmael, who Esav is, who the Arabs are, who the West is, who the Chinese are, who the Japanese are, what are these nations in the world that know nothing about real Judaism, why do they exist, and so on. All these things are involved, you see. But that's why when I say very simply, at this point, we will say that this formula of Guf plus Neshama refers to Jews only. It also refers to Goyim in a slightly different sense, but only after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, it referred to everyone, almost equally, except for minor variations of a theme. And we will go into those minor variations at a different point in time. Okay? But that's not really what we want to go into. We don't want to study that. It would be impossible. Do you see now why Series 3 comes after Series 1 and 2? You see? Because you cannot study the nature of Goyim, who they are, the nature and the meaning of human history, the very understanding of the process of history itself, unless you first understand the basic ideas of what a person is, what he's supposed to do, why he's supposed to do it, what are the hanhagas or the activities of God which bring them to its ultimate purpose. What is that purpose, you see? What is evil? We must understand these fundamental ideas. Series 1 and 2 deal with these fundamental ideas. Adam, or a person therefore, is composed of not two substances, but two entities. Each one can survive on its own and flourish. God combined both so that they merge into one entity. Is it possible to separate them? Yes, it is possible to separate them. But once they have been merged, even their separation is never the same as if they would have been separate, if they would have remained separate originally. There are still connections. They are really eternally connected. Why is man composed of two entities? Why is he a being of really two entities? Because God wants him to have free will, free choice. You cannot have free choice unless you have two things to choose of. If I say you have a choice, either A or A, is that a free choice? No. Free choice means A or B. A or B means G or N. You see, that's the simple idea which we'll sit with right now. That's why it's composed of these two. Now, what we said was, once he's composed of these two, what does a person look like? If G has its own, if the Guf has its own proclivities, its own inclinations, and the Neshama is an entity with its own desires, so this combination will be reflective of which one? You see, obviously he's going to be reflective of both. But the question is, will it be reflective of both of them equally? The answer is no. The way that a person reflects the integral relationship of his Guf and the Neshama is essentially determined by the GN ratio. That is a technical process or definition of what this really determines, or what it refers to. The GN ratio tells you at any point in time which entity is the greater of the two. Which one is the man reflecting between these two? If G is higher, now, we said that there's a continuum. Let's say 1 to 10. With this, you see, this is the G continuum, that's the N continuum. Also, you see, this is also 1 to 10. You see. Now, when man was first created, his N was 9, his G was 1. So, when man was first created, was he a greater reflection of his neshama or of his guf? Of his neshama. Obviously. In other words, and as I explained last week, very critically, when Adam Rishon was first made, he felt his body was like a suit of clothes. That's how much pressure was on him. He knew its awareness, he felt its aspects, but that's essentially all it was, really. Most of his feeling was his neshama. How does he feel his neshama? He felt his neshama through his guf. But what he felt was the drives of the neshama itself, through the physical drives. In other words, since Adam Rishon was actually a person, and he had a guf, he had to eat. Couldn't get around that. But what that eating felt like, the nature of its experience, was totally different for Adam than it is for us. When we eat something, we feel the pleasures, we feel the sensations in our tongue, we feel the pleasure, the satiation. We feel it as a total physical experience. Do you ever feel eating as a spiritual experience? No. You may think you do, you may try to, but the actuality is that eating, you see, is a physical experience in mind and in body, you see. We don't develop a tremendous rhythm from eating. That's ridiculous. We do it when we learn or when we daven. You don't do it when you eat. Why? Because eating cannot give you a spiritual experience in that way. But when Adam ate, when he ate, he felt a spiritual experience itself. Did he feel it totally spiritual? No. He also felt it partly physical. But he literally, when he was eating, his neshama was able to produce a specific pleasure or hana from the eating itself. We do not know of such an experience. It does not exist anymore. We have lost that, and we have lost far more. That's what it means by a GN, you see. That's what a GN ratio means. Adam starts out with a GN of 1 to 9. Okay? After the Chet, Adam was 2 to 8. Was Adam the same person before the Chet, before his sin, and after? No. Is a 1 to 9 being the same one as a 2 to 8? Vastly different. Vastly different. Was Adam aware that he was once a 1 to 9 and that now he's a 2 to 8? You think Adam was aware of that?
Some suffering.
Yes. Adam was aware of it. Not only that, Adam is the only being, there are only 2 beings who were ever aware to the fullest extent of certain things, but Adam was the only one that ever knew and realized the drop from one level to the other in that way. No other man ever experienced that. But there is one other person or one other being who will experience a similar type of pain, except that the pain is the inverse. Adam, before the Chet, was in the highest level that a man can reach before Olam Haba, before he did the sin. Okay? When he dropped, he was a total different person. But he remembered who he was. That memory was his punishment, his pain. Could you imagine that pain? It's hard to even massage. That was his pain. That's why they say that even though Adam lived another 930 years, he never committed another sin. The memory of that, he never again committed another sin. At the end of time, there will be one other individual who will experience this in exact reverse. He will be in GN a 9 to 1, and he will know what will be up ahead when mankind again goes to the highest level that it will attain. Who is that individual? That person is the Mashiach. And that is his suffering. Except that he suffers without being responsible for his suffering, and Adam caused his own suffering.
But Mashiach rises to 1 to 9, right?
When everyone rises together, when all of mankind rises, the Mashiach will rise. But there will be many, many years before that happens. Today, when the Mashiach must live as an ordinary mortal and must be an ordinary mortal, even less than an ordinary mortal, yet know what will be up ahead and be able to feel it. You see, that is what they call the sufferings of the Mashiach. That is the essence of really what it is. Why that is, that's a long discussion, you see. And that comes after the whole discussion of the Goyim. That's series 4. Okay.
After the 9 to 1, you said that it would go back to the 1 to 9. Is it possible to be a 1 to 9? The body,
No.
with technology.
Contradiction.
Yeah.
No.
Let's say science.
No, but you don't
and
understand what a 9.
spirituality.
No, but you don't understand what a 9 to 9 is. No, you don't understand.
I understand free will and it's got. It can't
No,
be equal.
your question shows that you're not clear on what was on you missed the point, which I believe many people miss. You see, I understand what you're saying. You're saying that, well, toward the end of time, when mankind will have developed enormous science and technology, right? Then their guf will be at the level of 9, right? Tremendous, right? And then they'll have tremendous, after Mashiach comes, tremendous neshama, so the neshama will be back to 9. But that's not a 9 to 9. The presence of science and technology in the world is, no. The presence of science and technology in the world has nothing to do with the guf being 9 as such. The guf being 9 means that all you can feel is your body in terms of your personal experience. And all you want is to satisfy your body. That's what a guf of 9 means. You see, science and technology has nothing to do with guf. Science and technology, you see, relates to chokhmah, which can be an Indian of neshama as well. You see, have to remember very specifically what it is. Now, what we said is that our culture today is a G culture. It is a guf culture. Why? Not only because everyone is running around to satisfy his needs, but that the culture allows such a possibility. When the guf becomes more and more powerful, then the hatzlocha of the world becomes more and more devoted to the nuances and the subtleties of the guf. You see, most people today are involved in getting homes, furnishing them with beautiful furniture, making the home environment look nice and beautiful, wearing the best of clothes, eating the best of food, having a great time. You see, whatever the story is, most people are involved in this kind of enterprise. And there's a large segment of the world which has been allowed to partake of this in numerous different subtleties and variations. You can go out today in America, Western Europe, and many places of the world, and eat almost anything you want. You can almost manipulate almost every different combination of taste buds in you by every different type of food. Really, incredible. You can wear almost any different type of clothes combination. You can travel almost anywhere, really. You can build almost any kind of house, furnish it almost any way you want. You can get any type of car with any type of gadget, you see. All these things is guf, or the hatzlocha of the guf. When God condemns the world to the level of G, He condemns the culture of mankind to support that G. Hence, the culture of mankind, of the world, is really involved in supporting G. What am I talking about? What is a world like that is a G world and a world like that's an N world? You see. A G world is a world which is concerned with physical pleasure in every different variation. But it is also a world where you have also must be involved with guf. Many people complain to me. They complain to me, I don't have any time to learn. I want to learn, I want to study, I want to learn Torah, I want to do things, I want to accelerate my mind, I want to learn my hashkafa, I want to listen to the tapes more, but I can't. I've got my job, so many hours of my job, I've got so many responsibilities constantly. Why am I so preoccupied with so many things? You don't realize that. That is the G curse. When the Baruch Hashem does not want you to use your neshama, He makes sure that you are constantly preoccupied with your guf. How? Either you're enslaved to the pleasures of your body, or you're enslaved to the preoccupations of your body. You see, it's a different type of slavery. It's an incredible thing. We think that we're free in many ways. We're free to enjoy ourselves in many ways. But the truth of the matter is, there are very few people who are really free. Most people have to work long and hard, really, to make what little they have so that they can go out and enjoy themselves and forget how hard they had to work to earn it. It's a very subtle cycle. We think that we can get away from this cycle, and we think that we can fool God in certain ways. But the truth of the matter is we fool no one. Because what the Baruch Hashem says, you want a G life? Fine. Then you will find yourself constantly preoccupied by your guf. Meaning, you will have to work and work and work. And if you're not working, you will have to be worried why you're not working, you see, or why you're not making any money. The Baruch Hashem will get you there. In other words, for those people who don't have to work so hard, they are constantly sitting in worry if business is going to be good, and whether or not they're going to make the same living they did this week as last week, or so on and so forth. And they go into all hours of the night. So, for those exhausted professionals who don't have to work so hard, for example, let's say very wealthy men, or whatever the story is, they are always worried about their fortunes all the time. They're always on the phone with their brokers, or they're on the phone with their partners, or whatever have you. The Baruch Hashem sees to it that there's a never-ending subtlety, intricacy, to constantly preoccupy your mind, either through anxiety, agitation, or just strain, you see. And then, when that's finished, He then allows you to run after the pleasure of the guf, you see. But, what we have to understand is that there's a cause and effect relationship here. Even we ourselves, who are on the level of a guf, have a great deal to say what kind of life we lead, you see. Meaning that the more we pursue guf, the more we become guf. To become guf, you see, is to become what I have just described, which most people really are, you see. There are 7 days to a week. You come home from Monday to Friday, right? You work from Monday to Friday. You come home, you're tired. What do you do the rest of your time? You want to relax. Relaxation is a negative activity. It's an attempt to remove the strain of accumulation of an entire day, which means that half the day goes like that, and the other half goes like that. And that's what your life is about, you see. You're always climbing the same hill, and then in the evening, you're coming down from that hill. You're so ingrained in that type of lifestyle, you don't realize its repetitiveness. And what you don't realize is that this is a life which literally runs in circles. It's exactly that. Because you never get anywhere, really. You think you're getting somewhere. You don't. Why don't you get anywhere? You can't get anywhere. Because it is built into Guf to go nowhere. That's what it is. The only place you can really grow and really move is in N. N is the only thing that can really go somewhere, not G. All G can produce is this type of a cycle. That's all it can do. You can't get away. Yes, there are some people who get away from that cycle, or they appear to. But those are the models who are poised up for all of humanity so that everyone just flies after. You see that guy? That guy became a millionaire at 35 and he is retired. You see? He doesn't have to do this anymore. You see? How many guys do you know like that? Really? But what happens? What happens is that guy who then does retire at 35 doesn't live beyond 39. You see? That's really what happens, and you don't know about it really. Or that guy at 35 begins to experience all kinds of other stuff. Because there's another trick to G, you see. Besides being an up and down cycle, G is something else. What is that? Tremendous thirst that comes in your life. No peace of mind. A life with G has no peace of mind. Am I getting you people nervous? You notice how, what a calm voice I'm doing it. I can't get excited. So, if you're not preoccupied in walking up the hill from a 9-to-5 job, and then coming back down over your TV set for the rest of the night, defogging what you fogged up the whole day, or running out to the bar and getting a drink to remove the damage, or taking some drugs, or some pot, or whatever the story is, to undo the severe strain that you've accumulated over the day's work, to enjoy yourself at night. If that's not happening, then suddenly you find yourself in unusual thirst. What kind of thirst? God knows what thirst are. Like it says in the Gemara, Habe shluchim lamokom. There are many messengers to the Gunah Shalom. What kind of thirst? Well, we're not going to start with physical thirst. You see, little aches and pains and suddenly here and there. Most of the thirsts that are associated with G are really not physical thirst. You know that? You know that most of the thirsts which are associated with N are physical thirst. Sounds funny. It sounds strange. It's a subtlety here. Yusurim, pain which comes to a person because of his involvement with a G, is usually not a physical pain. It is a mental anguish. Why? Because it's designed to cut off N. N survives through the mind. That's why. A person who is in mental anguish does not learn. He is not involved in the Shama. He doesn't deserve to be involved in the Shama. His main issue is mental anguish. Mental anguish could do far more damage than physical anguish. Really. Because the punishment doesn't go around punishing people physically. Most people who are young, until they're older people, aren't necessarily in bad physical situations where literally they're sick. You see? So he has a flu. But many people are in constant states of unhappiness and depression or anxiety or agitation, you see. Emptiness. This is constant. This is the inheritance of G. Mental suffering. Where do you get mental suffering from? You got a boss that you hate. But you can't give up your job because you have to make a living. But the man drives you nuts. You have a wife that you can't stand. You're not making enough money. And you're constantly being surrounded by people who make more money than you. You have children who are not doing well in school. They're doing very poor. You have a son, Chas v'Shalom, who became a drug addict. You have a brother that wound up in jail. You have relatives that are doing very poorly. You see. You've got to work on a very difficult job, a menial job, and barely make a parnasa. There are many, many different ways to cause mental anguish. And these things are constantly with us. Why? Sometimes we say to ourselves, I don't understand. If my whole tachlis is to derive growth from ruchnius, why is every aspect of my life so involved in some tzora? Why? You see, the answer is G. This is what G means. Because it's an outgrowth. It is an outgrowth of your own drives and your own objectives. But you don't see any connection because you don't understand what guf really means. You see, I cannot even explain it to you now. It will take many, many months before we can go into really why these things are connected. Why really is guf connected to such turmoil and such unhappiness? Why is it that when Adam did the sin, right? What was one of the curses that the Rebbeinu Shem said to Adam? As soon as the Adam Rishon did the sin, what did the Rebbeinu Shem say? By the sweat of your brow will you eat your bread. You know what that statement was? That said to Adam, you have chosen the guf will be your inheritance. From now on, your guf will be the central feature of activity. No more will you be in a Gan Eden, where you can just pick from the trees and just eat, without any concern in acquiring your parnasa. Now the Rebbeinu Shem says, you want to survive, you must work for it. And you must work hard, you see. Physically, you must physically begin to interact with the world to produce what you need to survive. But this wasn't always the case. Adam Rishon before the Chet didn't have to do that at all. Adam Rishon before the Chet literally lived in a world of almost end, you see. He had almost no preoccupation. After, it was no longer true. But the people that lived after Adam, did they have to work hard, tilling the ground? No, they didn't have to work hard. Before Adam Rishon, after Adam Rishon with the Chet, what do you think was the agricultural process? A man would plant a seed, right, and he would never look at it again. And the next time he turned around, his field would be filled with food. You see. In other words, because of the fact that the GN was still very low, you see, after Adam, it was still only 2. Man still didn't have to work so hard. He had to preoccupy himself a little bit and interact with the earth, but only a little bit. And the earth took care of the rest. It was almost like a servant, you see. It is only now and after, years later, that we begin to see our lifestyle and the way we are. It wasn't always like that. What's very critical to understand is that all these things that we see is the G process. It is a good process. Each thing bringing the other. What is an end process? What is an end process? There are different levels to an end process. One of the lowest levels of end process, which doesn't exist anymore, is the concept where you have tremendous pleasure from thinking and from learning and knowing. How many people, would you consider yourself intellectuals? How many people will consider themselves intellectuals? Some guys not. Okay? But the truth of the matter is intellectualism a revered quality in American culture? No. That's right. In fact, we reserve the very complimentary term egghead for an intellectual. Why is that? Because most people do not understand what it means to derive pleasure from thinking. Or more important, to derive pleasure from knowledge and from wisdom. That's almost like an absurd concept. The word wisdom is almost a ridiculous, it's an old-fashioned word. Today it's science. It's data-based. Wisdom is a very old-fashioned, strange-looking word, you see. But what's the difference between data and wisdom? Data or facts are nothing more than specific descriptions of reality as you see it. That's what facts are. Wisdom is not only an understanding of what the facts are, but what the meaning of those facts are in terms of human existence. The people really know what makes sense, what doesn't, what counts and what doesn't. That's wisdom. Wisdom allows a person to live a life of peace of mind. Facts allow you to live a life cluttered and constantly frayed to different notions. The pursuit of wisdom, or the pursuit of chokhmah, you see, what is that? Well, I guess it's someone who reads books, or collects books. I know, it's somebody who majored in philosophy. Right? Today, who is the wise man? Well, this guy is really an intellectual. Right? He went ahead and got a degree in philosophy in college. That's a chokhmah. That's the way we look at it, you see. The very way we look at it is an indication of how low we've come. Because the truth of the matter is that the central instrument of the neshama is the mind. The central instrument of the neshama in the body is the mind. And that what we have lost is the ability to enjoy our mind. The strange concept. Enjoy my mind? I mean, without taking drugs? You see? Yeah, everyone is into mind bending these days. But through chemistry, I'm talking about mind bending not by taking chemicals, but by learning wisdom, chokhmah, emes, profound truths. You see? You want to say to me, well, what kind of pleasure is that? And the truth of the matter is, to a certain extent, you all know what I'm talking about already. What is that? That's what we learn in the shir. One of the experiences I think that people have in the shir is that when they leave, there's a certain pleasantness, there's a certain pleasure. That's what we learn in the shir. One of the experiences I think that people have in the shir is that when they leave, there's a certain pleasantness, there's a certain pleasure. If you say to yourself, what is that pleasure? What happened? You see, what did the guy do on the board? You see, I gave a share last week. It was a great share. What does that mean it was a great share? What does that mean? What did I really do? Did I manipulate a lot of facts? Did I use a lot of numbers? Did I quote a lot of different what? Ancient sages? No. What I did was is to try and give you a deep understanding of something that intuitively everyone knows really does exist. And somehow, when you were able to grab that piece of knowledge, you see, there was a certain simcha. Did you ever read something or come to understand something and that thing produces simcha, joy? That's a strange thing. How can you get simcha from wisdom or from chokhmah? Because that's the definition of wisdom. The true definition of wisdom, you see, is it touches the neshama, and the neshama is suddenly stimulated. Why? Because when a person meets information that really makes a difference, that makes sense, that there's something real about this, something different than all the other types of information that he's seen before. You see, suddenly his neshama moves or is slightly affected. You see what I'm saying? That, in a very, very minuscule way, is the simcha of the neshama through chokhmah. But chokhmah is an end drive. It's not a G drive. It's an end drive. This has also been taken away, so that most of the people on the planet Earth have no joy from chokhmah anymore. They don't know what it is. They've forgotten, you see. So that intellectualism is considered some kind of negative quality or some kind of weird quality. An intellectual is a weirdo today. A person who devotes himself to the pursuit of mind is a strange, unusual, weird guy, far out person. It's really what it is. But the incredible thing is that person really is the norm. Now that person is a much greater reflection of what a man should be than what we all are. He is much closer to a GN which is much higher, you see. As I've said, the pursuit of Chokhmah is among the lower levels of the Neshama. There are higher levels than that. The pursuit of Kedusha, of Ruchnius, of Dvekas, of Ruach HaKodesh, and of Nevi'us are the highest levels. You can't even begin to understand what that is. If you can barely understand what Chokhmah is and why you should enjoy, you see, the pursuit of wisdom, how can you understand what it means, the pursuit of Nevi'us or prophecy? How can I even talk about it here? It will take me 6 months before I can talk to an Olam that begins to understand what I'm talking about in these ways. You see. But that's what it is. That's what a GN means. That's what a drop in the GN is. Can we break that? To some extent we can. How? If we shift towards N, what happens is we set up our own cause and effect chain. If we shift towards N, if we attempt to understand Chokhmah, if we go after Kedusha, if we involve ourselves more and more in terms of things of the mind, especially Torah, and less in things of the Guf, your life will begin to turn around as well. And the G aspects of your life will begin to slowly disappear. Will they fully disappear? That depends. That depends on what's running your life. The Hanagas HaYichud and the Hanagas HaMishpat. If the Hanagas HaMishpat is running your life, yes. If the Hanagas HaYichud is running your life, it's a different situation. Because it means the Bechira is not in your hands. And the G situation must be what it is. You see. But that's essentially what it is. Of all the ideas that I have said in the last 4 months, for the new groups, and for the older group of people who've been here for a while, for the last 6 months, 7 months, there are very few ideas that I will say that will be as important to your welfare and to your progress as a person. There are very few ideas that will have a more powerful determination of what will happen to you in Adam Haba, and very shortly, you see, once the Gula does arrive, then the shir that I've given this week and last week on the GN ratio. You see, it is kedai to listen to last week's shir and this week's shir once a week for the next 3 months. And you think I'm exaggerating. I am not. Because if you live in a G, what happens? The G wants to survive and the N wants to survive. Each wants to survive according to the way it is, right? You see, there's nothing wrong with the G wanting to survive if it is a G alone, or an N if it is an N alone. The Bunisham has no quarrel with a G that wants to be a G, because that's what it is, or an N that wants to be an N. But when you're a GN together, you see, and the Bunisham says, be an N, you see, change that ratio, and then you shift to a G, that's when problems occur, you see. And the G will attempt to drag you down to the fullest extent that it can. And it will do it subtly, because you won't even know that it's happening, you see. You see. Suddenly you'll go out and you'll have atzlacha. You'll get a raise in your salary. Right, you'll get a raise. Your boss will say, you know what, I'm promoting you, and I'm giving you a raise of $200 a week. That's right. But you used to work from 9 to 5. You've got to stay from 9 to 7:30. That's right. Well, more money, more responsibility. Isn't that what you want? But what do you mean? That's more stress. That's more strain. I can barely deal with these clients 8 hours a day. You see, I don't understand. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what everybody wants? Isn't that the American dream? Okay. Excuse me. I did want to. The word love is a very misused and misunderstood term. There's many different connotations.
I asked that question the other night to another teacher, and I said, what is love? And he said, all things.
No.
So, and that satisfied you sometimes.
It's not all things. That's a generalization that means nothing.
So what is it?
Love is, in essence, what love is the desire for unity, for oneness. The word Ahava in Hebrew means love. It has the same numerical value as the word Echad, one. Because essentially, love emanates from objects or entities which are essentially intrinsically one, but which have been separated. The desire to reconnect is what we experience as love.
That's why it's different from male, female plus.
You understand what I'm saying? That's its real essence. Love is the put it more mechanically. Love is a homeostatic desire to reunite elements which were disunited. But it's very mechanical. But you feel it as a feeling. Therefore, the neshama desires to reunite with the Banisham and cling to him. That's called dveikus. A man and woman who love each other attempt to unite, you see, in that sense. And love, and all of mankind, if they were capable of feeling that love, also attempt to reunite, because there was a time when mankind was one person.
So it's striking that the heart feels that, not the mind.
Yes, the heart. Yes. No, both. There are two separate tools. Yes. No, that is a tool of the heart. But there are two different tools, each one with its own characteristics. A heart without a mind is blind, and a mind without a heart is empty.
Exactly. So that's why I was asking you where the heart is.
Wow. Well, I can't, there are many questions there, but if you ask me what love is, I'll say that's the essential definition. That's essentially what it's
But to me, the concept of all things is exactly and basically what you just did.
okay, you can say that. If that's what the guy meant, then that's you can say that.
Somehow.
Yeah.
You didn't say what you said, but somehow.
Yeah, well, you can say that. Yeah, love is all things, meaning that love is the essence which ties all things. Yes, that's it. No, I'll go along with that. That's fine. That's it, but that's just a very generalized, I don't go into that type of quality stuff. I'm more precise than that.
Rabbi, you coming back to the trip or what?
Yeah, I'll be
Guarantee do we have?
You can't leave us.
none, but I'll be back. You'll have to trust me. Okay.
You won't abandon us.
In that aspect of Series 1, which is the concept of time, the only cause of existence is the Bnei Shalom. Nothing can exist without him. That means that it requires his hashpah, his constant influence at every second of time. Now, there is only one thing in creation which does not require a hashpah from God at all. And not only that, but that it has the power or the effect of creating its own hashpah the other way. Everything which happens in this world comes from God. We say therefore that the hashpah is from above to below. Hashpah means influence or power. Heishin, Pei, Ayin, Hey. Right. Everything comes from above. Everything that is done. That means that not only does every creature exist from the hashpah coming from above, but its activities are determined. That means it does exactly what the hashpah tells it. No more, no less. There is only one being who is outside of the hashpah, and can produce its own hashpor and literally boomerang it, so that the hashpor that it produces goes back, and that's man. Man, because of his free will, is outside of the hashpor that comes from above, and he produces his own hashpor from below to above. Everything else is subject to the whims of heaven. That's another way of saying it. Meaning that everything which exists, every plant, animal, every inanimate object, behaves exactly as it is told. And all its behavior is constantly told to it. It has no behavior on its own. That's what it means not to have free will. Not to have free will is to be an absolute robot. Everything in creation is an absolute robot except for man. That's a very blunt way of saying it, but that is true. Again, everything which exists as a total robot, an automaton, is nothing more than a reflection of what heaven decrees. It cannot veer one iota in one speck of its existence. It will exist and behave at every point in its existence, duration, as heaven decrees. This is true of every animal, of every plant, of every inanimate object. It is true of every spiritual object, every malach, every sphere, every existence, above and below. There is nothing in all of creation that moves at all on its own. Everything moves at the control of heaven. It has no control of itself. The only being who can do things on its own, outside of the will of heaven, is man. This should give you some idea how extraordinarily powerful a human being is. In fact, if you meditate on this for an hour, you may begin to understand the true essence of what a person really is. Because if you can understand what free will is, that there is nothing in all existence which has free will. Nothing. Nothing. Everything is an absolute robot. It doesn't look like a robot. When you see a little cat scurrying across the street, it doesn't look like it's a robot. But that cat scurries exactly as it's told. It doesn't move a millimeter outside of where it's supposed to go. When you look at the random motions of a fly on the wall, you think, well, what's the difference to a fly that goes this way or that way? A fly goes exactly where it's told. And that's exactly what it does. It is being told what to do with it. But it always comes to it and says, do this, do that. It never tells itself what it wants to do. It always obeys. A human being does not have to obey. For God to create a being which is outside of His own Shefa is a miraculous event. For the essence of existence itself, to allow a person to have a will outside of that control is simply staggering. And again, free will is one of the most incredible of all the creations the Baruch Hashem did. The capacity of free will is far greater than anything else the Baruch Hashem made. Why? Because everything the Baruch Hashem made is an absolute robot, and it's nothing more than a reflection. Man's deeds, basically, to be what he wants to do. But even then there are limitations. Hence, there are two types of shefas, hashpors. Rather, there's shefa and hashpor mean the same thing. There are two types of, there is two directions for hashpor. That's more precise. There is one hashpor, but there are two directions of it. Either from above to below, or from below to above. The hashpor that comes from above to below is hashpor which controls. It is hashpor of the Bnei Shalom that determines the nature and behavior of everything which exists. The hashpor from below to above is the hashpor of free will. That hashpor tells God what to do, in the sense that the Bnei Shalom has allowed man to dictate what he will do. That is an extraordinary event. The Bnei Shalom says, I will not proceed until I await your orders. Why does the Bnei Shalom give man this type of koyach? Because God says to man, you must earn your own olam haba. That's the old situation of Nam the Ksufa. Free will is therefore necessary. So the Bnei Shalom says, I will let you tell me whether or not you will get olam haba. In any person's life, you will do many, many different activities. Unbeknownst to you, there is only a certain percentage of those activities which are free, meaning that it's not subject to a higher hashpah. The rest are governed by the hashpah coming down. You cannot tell the difference.
Both directions on there?
What's that?
Both directions on there? Combination of the two?
Well, yes. The events of a person's life can either be one or the other, and within the same event itself, there's a fraction or percentage that can reflect one, and the other percentage reflect the other. Sometimes you can tell the two. I think we spoke about this last time. Yeah. You have a whole shiur on this last time. Yeah. But generally, it's very difficult to tell the difference. Okay. This is the concept of the direction of hashpah. And it's a very, very important concept. Extremely important. Because it's tied with the very purpose of man. The direction of hashpah at any point in time tells us exactly if man is free or he's not free. You see. There are certain times when the Bnei Shalom will allow man to be free. There are other times when the Bnei Shalom will not allow man to be free. We will discuss this at length in Series 2. Now, let's get into the notion of time, which is the second critical idea. Judaism looks at time in a very important way. Time is very much wrapped up with the idea of free will. How is that? Most people see time in the following way. There exists a road, and that road is called time. There is past, there is present, there is future. The future. Where is the future? Well, it's up ahead. It's up ahead. We don't know what it's about. Only God knows what it's about. But there is something called the future up ahead. It doesn't exist in our reality yet, you see, but it's up ahead, and we eventually meet it. We look at time as just something we travel to, like an ocean. And we're on a boat, and we're sailing across that ocean. Every new mile that we encounter on the ocean is the next point in time. In other words, time is like a sea, which exists in its totality, past, present, and future. and we're floating on it. And as we move along it, we meet the ocean further and further up ahead. But in other words, we are traveling through time. Time is a separate, independent entity like space, and we are traveling through it, you see. That which we have not met yet is the future. That which we are meeting is the present. And that which we have already met is the past. Another way to say, it's like you're traveling on a road, you're on a truck, and you're driving along on a road. The road exists up ahead, you see. But you haven't gotten there yet. So every foot that we travel with the car, we're meeting. So it becomes the present. And then as we finish with it, it becomes the past, you see. But essentially the existence of the road is separate from the existence of the truck. The truck travels on the road, along the road, you see. So time is like a distance or a point on that road in which the truck is constantly meeting. Do we understand this? But is that really what time is? No, that's not what time is at all. It is not at all what time is. There is no such thing as the future. The future does not exist at all. Time is a road which is being created as the truck moves. In other words, imagine a truck on a road, and the road does not extend beyond the front wheels. And as the truck moves, the wheels literally create the road. Or the road miraculously appears as the truck moves, so that the truck never falls over the precipice. Do we understand? That's a whole different notion. The future does not exist. The only thing which exists is now. And you cannot even put your finger on now, because now exists in an infinitesimal point of time. You do not exist literally 1 second from now. Not only you don't exist 1 second from now, we don't even know what you're going to look like 1 second from now. What do we mean? Well, let me explain it this way. We all say that God created the world. When did God create the world? Well, He created the world 5,746 years ago. Interesting. What was God doing 5,750 years ago? Well, obviously there was no world at that time. So God decided to create a world at a certain point in time. So we say, very interesting. Why did God create the world at that point in time? Why didn't He create it 1 billion years before? Or 1 billion years after? You see. Well, that question assumes that God exists in time. You see. And that He goes through time like we do. And that there was a certain point in that time when He decided to make the world. That's absurd. There was no such thing as time before the world. When God created the physical universe, He created time. When it says Bereshis Bo Elokim, that's a Shemayim V'Sa'aretz, which is the first pasuk in the Torah, it says in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. That's a faulty translation. Bereshis does not really mean in the beginning. Bereshis really should be translated with a beginning. Bereshis, with a beginning. You see, Bo Elokim is a Shemayim V'Sa'aretz. Did He create all of physical reality? In other words, as soon as reality appeared, suddenly the first second started. What was reality like before? It wasn't. What was it like before? We have no idea. That is the world of God. It is not a world of time. There is no such thing as time. What do we see from this? What we see from this is a very, very critical concept. We see the close connection between existence and time. We do not exist through time. But as we exist with time. Our existence is literally extended from second to second to second. We don't have a permanent existence in time, like a truck on a road as it travels. The truck is separated from the road. The truck has its own existence, the road has its, you see. But that's not what time is. The truck and the road is the same thing. As the truck moves, the road is being created, meaning that the existence of the truck and the existence of the road are both dependent on each other. That means that existence, as existence moves, rather, existence occurs or expresses itself in time or through duration. That's a subtlety. You got to grab this one. We don't exist in time. Rather, existence moves with time. That means that 1 second from now, there is no existence. Literally. There is no existence at all. What is there? There's absolutely nothing. When God created this world with time, that means that existence itself moves second by second. Every second is literally a new existence. You don't realize that because there's the illusion of continuity. You think that, for example, from now to now is 1 second. You think that it's the same existence, don't you? You're absolutely mistaken. There were 2 different existences. Because when existence manifests itself in 1 second, for it to move on requires the will of God. If that will would stop, that would be literally the last second. God doesn't have to take the world out of existence. You see? It's not like we exist and He has to take it out of existence to destroy it. He simply does not allow it to continue. Because in order for it to continue, He literally moves it second by second. If He was simply to let go, it would stop and instantly disappear. Do you see what I'm saying? You see the subtlety of that idea? It's a strange thought. It's a frightening thought, really. That means that the next second, between 1 second to another of existence, are 2 totally different realities that simply look exactly the same. That's all it is. It looks the same. You, from 1 second to the next, are 2 different people. It's an illusion that you're the same.
Kind of insensible to move.
It is. That's exactly. That's exactly what it is. Yes, it's a still. Yes. Each one is a frame. Existence, and I think that's an excellent example, is nothing more than a series of frames. You see, God creates the separate frames, one at a time, and as they move, we have the illusion called life. But life is really an illusion, you see, just like a movie is. What is really a movie? Really? A movie is nothing more than a series of still frames coming so rapidly together that it looks like it's a continuous event. That's exactly what the illusion of life is. You see, every frame is a new creation. So it's not that God has to created the world a long time ago and we're here secure. You see, God must create the world every infinitesimal of a second to keep it going. To keep it going. He doesn't have to take it out of existence because it has no tenure. If you think a professor feels insecure when he has no tenure, can you imagine what existence feels like? It has no tenure. Why should it have tenure? Is there anything about its reality that should give it tenure? What is the only thing that has tenure? God. You see, that is the nature of His existence. That's another way of understanding the difference between God and us. The truth is, we can never have tenure. To have tenure is to be God. Why? Why does God have tenure? Because He is existence itself. We aren't existence. We are simply given existence from second to second. You see. Hence we have no intrinsic tenure. But if you are the existence itself, it is tenure by definition. Yes, do we understand this?
How do you prophecy you have no future?
Oh,
I mean, there are things that don't fit into the model.
no. You have no future. That's definite. Prophecy, what God shows what He intends. Prophecy is nothing more than a preview of what existence is about to look like once it happens.
This sounds like a word game.
No.
No, you know what I'm saying? I mean, what does that mean? The only thing I can see that means is that if you continue with these frames of existence in a similar mode to what you on a certain mode, then this is the outcome that will happen.
Yes.
Like illness,
Yes.
Okay, but
That's what it is.
Okay.
It's simply the preview of what history looks like when it will appear. But it's the plan of history. It's the plan of the future. It's a design. It's like an architect's drawing. Is there a difference between the architect's drawing and an actual building? Of course. One is the plan and the other is the actual entity. Prophecy is the plan. The future is the reality. And people are shown the plan.
you can man with the contract.
What's that?
And man with the contract.
Well,
But
God is
no,
the
because
contractor. Well, in a sense.
No, I mean, if
Get
you're
right,
doing
yes,
it,
yes.
that's why the buildings don't always look like the blueprint one.
Right.
Well,
Okay, well, let me go.
When the
Same way
prophecy,
when you think or imagine that you're going to become, it's not a physical reality, it doesn't exist, but the possibility.
Yes. God has
By
promised us,
imagining it.
the Avtoch of the Bnei Shalom is that He will not destroy the world. That's the Avtoch. He has said to us that He will never allow man, well, let me just go into that from a different point.
is prophecy ever
What we
changed?
must understand is the following, and here is the clinch of the entire matter. If time and existence are the same thing, neither being separate from the other, you see, what does that have to do with man's free will? What it has to do is the most extraordinary thing of all. And now you begin to realize the true power of a person. What will existence look like a second from now? What will the future look like? Well, the answer to that depends on who determines it. If everything was determined by a hashpah coming from above to below, everything, we would know what the future looked like. God would say instantly. Why? Because God would determine the future. That's what it means. But if there's a shefa coming from below to above, if man has the ability to have free will, what does that mean? That means that God cannot create the next second until He sees what man has done. In other words, the true architect of existence, you see, or rather, when God said to man, you have free will, God said to man, you literally are the architect of existence. That's the power of free will. Do you understand what I've said? Because the next second, the way it appears, must await the deeds of men. God, if all reality followed only the shefa of above, meaning what God wanted, then God doesn't have to wait for anyone. He would simply unfold existence according to His own plan. But when the Bnei Shalom says to man, you help me make my plan, because I give you free will, the Bnei Shalom has essentially relinquished or abandoned sole or absolute control of the design of existence. Do you see that? That's literally what he has done. He has relinquished his absolute control of what existence would look like. He is not the sole determinant anymore of the nature of reality. Of course, you need God for the next second, but what that next second will look like, what existence will look like that next second, nobody knows. God knows. How he knows, I have no idea, since he must await the man itself. But his knowledge is a whole different type of thing. He knows what that next second will look like, you see. But that's not relevant for us at this point. What is critical is that that next second must come from man. You know what it's like? It's like an enormous computer which has an incredibly complex program, okay? And what it is that the program that it has is a very complex program that what it does is spits out calculations. It has thousands, hundreds of millions of formulas, and it's constantly calculating all kinds of formulas. But what happens is that the machine at any certain point stops, and it says, I need your input. Feed me data. Tell me what are the variables. So what you do is, the program comes along, feeds in some of the data, and suddenly the machine takes off again, uses that information, and then goes on calculating. And then a minute later, it stops and says, more data, you see. That's exactly what existence is. Existence is like a huge computer, moving on its own, except that second by second, or at certain strategic points, it stops, and it says, I await your input. As soon as there's input, it automatically goes on for a time, then stops again. So that the movement of the computer is a participation or a combination of its own program and the input of the programmer. You see, that is the same type of relationship that the Rebbeinu Shem has with man. The machine of existence moves, and God controls that machine. It moves according to His will. But the Rebbeinu Shem has said, I need your input in order to go on, because I will not go on unless you tell me certain things of what to do, because I have built this world and the next according to your efforts. That means that every second the machine stops and awaits your input. That is exactly what human history is. And I make this incredible statement. If we knew the design of that machine, and we can figure out a way to know the input of data at any second, we ourselves can literally describe what the future will look like, exactly the way it will be. Do you see how precise that is? It is literally that precise. Do you see what I'm saying?
We know the input.
If we knew the design, if we knew the program,
then we know
Yeah,
that what the results will be.
we could figure it out ourselves. Exactly. In other words,
but we make our own input.
yes, but I'm saying,
Yes.
I'm saying is if we had like some kind of a screen, and that screen could tell us the collective bechira of all of mankind, and let's say that was represented by a value, a number, right? And we had the machine in front of us, the real computer. You see, let's say for example I had this computer here, right, which does all the calculations, but I don't know all the numbers, and I need this other screen to tell me the number. So what I do is I play with the computer here, and I stop. Then I open up the screen, and then suddenly I see a number 5. I take that number and put it in the thing, and then the machine tells me the next step. But the truth of the matter is I could predict exactly what that computer will tell me before it does. You see, by knowing its program and by knowing the new number. You see. That's exactly. You could determine, you would know exactly what the future is. You would know exactly what history is at every point in time if we knew, you see, what? if we knew the machine of the Hashkoch itself and how to determine the collective value of the Bechira of all of mankind. Now, is that information possible? I don't know if you realize how staggering this information is. I'm literally putting in your hands the knowledge of God, not before its time, but I'm allowing you to predict before its time with a 100% accuracy that which God is about to do. God has, in other words, there is Chokhmah. There is a way. There is Chokhmah. Through Chokhmah, through wisdom, it is possible, literally, to know what the future will look like before it happens with absolute precision, greater than any prophet has ever been or will ever be, just by understanding alone, without any prophetic powers. You see? And I've just described to you in the last half hour the logic of it. And what I've said to you is true. Now, is such a thing possible? Is it? Yes and no. Meaning, is such a chokhmah available? Yes and no. You can know an enormous amount of that chokhmah. You can know. And the truth of the matter is, whether you are aware of it or not, this entire series of shurim is attempting to give you that exact type of information, even though you may not be aware of it. If you want to ask me, one of my basic objectives with this year, from beginning to end, at least on the first level, is that by the time I'm finished, and if you have been true to this and really worked at it, you will know enough chokhmah to literally pick up a newspaper and begin to make certain types of predictions. Really. Not exactly, but you will be able to see an incredible understanding of patterns, not haphazardly, that relate to each other. How? Because one of the things that we do in concentrating this year is to understand what's called Derech Hashem. What is Derech Hashem? Derech Hashem is the way of God. In other words, it's the way God operates. But God tells us how He operates. That's what the Torah is about. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, I will give you a book, and in that book, I will reveal to you the way I control reality. I will tell you how I operate. How do I operate? From something called the Hanhogas HaMishpat and something called the Hanhogas HaYichud. The Hanhogas HaMishpat and the Hanhogas HaYichud are the two, is the program. That's what the program is. You see, the problem is nobody has ever heard of that program and nobody knows how it works. Is it possible to understand? Yes, to a certain degree. You can literally become privy to the way God actually moves history and reality itself. Can we ever understand this in detail? No. Because we can never know all the variables involved. That would be impossible. You see. But you can get a general understanding of what the key variables are that move history, without a doubt, in a very profound way, and I'm not in a superficial way. You can know things that literally would frighten you once you know them. Really, that such information is even possible, but it is. Why? Because basically, it's exactly like I've said. It is all a machine. It is a machine with two different types of shefa. One shefa comes down, that's the part that we have no control, that's the machine part, and the other shefa goes up, that's the part that we determine. And there are elements that we can know, you see, at least from the shefa that comes down. We cannot put our finger on the bechira of mankind, but we can understand what the roots are of the shefa that comes down. And once we know that, we can begin to have a pretty good understanding of why history looks the way it does.